Delegate Wright. Delegate Wright, are you with us by phone? Delegate Reedy. Present. Senator Boysko.
Here.
Senator Housekeeping.
Here.
And Senator Lewis.
I'm here.
Steve Sandy. Yeah. Present. Ray Lemura.
Here.
Casey Logan. Here. Rich Stallman. Here. Jimmy Carr.
Here.
Mike Holt.
Here.
Christy Proctor.
Here.
Secretary Merrick or Representative, are you with us?
Present.
And Secretary Lohr or Representative?
That's Green, we got the Secretary Lohr. He'll be joining in at 11:15, but unfortunately we have to sneak out early today. We have an agency that's looked up.
Thanks for joining us. And to backtrack, Delegate Upwich, are you with us? All right, we'll see if he's able to join later on.
Thank you so much. So we are really blessed to be here in Hanover County today, and I'm very honored to introduce Madam Chair of the County, Angela Kelly-Wiesek, who has some remarks for us. And she's also, we have Delegate Scott here, Scott Wyatt as well. But thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, good morning and welcome to Hanover County. We are just delighted that you're here and that you've chosen our county as the place for your meeting today. As you know, access to high-speed internet has been a priority for Hanover County and every county throughout the state for many years. As a matter of fact, as I was telling Senator Boysko, I was pleased to have served as a citizen representative to Hanover's very first high-speed internet committee back in 2010. Building on the work of that first committee, we actually established a second committee in 2019, and Ms. Proctor served on that committee for us, and they drafted excellent work, outstanding result from that committee. They drafted what we call the Connect Hanover Broadband Plan that we have implemented, and that I am proud to say is working for us today. Now, depending on how you drove in from the various parts of the Commonwealth today, you may or may not realize that Hanover is 70% rural. And while our suburban residents certainly have access to high-speed internet, many in our county do not. In fact, 30% of Hanover's 17,000 school children, including Ms. Proctor, do not have access to high-speed internet from home. And so that is certainly, I think, a sobering statistic that we consider as we look at all of this. I know that many of you might think, how could there be a silver lining that's come from the last couple of years of the COVID-19 pandemic? But certainly, as we were going through that, and as we continue it today, it's always been my hope that that one of those silver linings would be removing the need for universal dedicated efforts for high-speed internet throughout our Commonwealth, indeed throughout our nation. I think we've seen the devastating or the benefits that high-speed internet can have, not just for education, as I kind of mentioned earlier, but also for healthcare and also for home-based businesses and the need for teleworking capabilities. But as you know, finding funds and service providers can be a major obstacle. It certainly was a major obstacle for us in putting together the Connect Hanover Broadband project.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome.
Sorry about that, everyone.
No, it's fine, it's fine. But yes, the Connect Hanover Broadband Initiative represents a $55 million investment to provide high-speed internet to more than 6,200 unserved homes and businesses in Hanover County. And again, this is a public-private investment that includes a commitment of roughly $14 million from the county and a similar commitment from the state with balance provided by private investment. And so we're very excited to begin this process with the Department of Housing and Community Development and our internet service provider, All Points Broadband. And in addition, All Points Broadband has partnered with Division Energy and Rappahannock Electric Cooperative. So this truly is a regional effort between the public and the private sector. And so we're very, very excited about that. So again, in closing, I just want to thank you all for allowing us to host you here today. Just a couple of housekeeping tips. There is additional seating in the back. We do have just a few snacks and some water up here for anyone who needs it. The restrooms, if you're not already aware, each out this door and to the left, there is a restroom there. Now, what I don't think that I put together in realizing that all of you would be with us today is that this wonderful building, this is our administration building, is starting to show a little age. So we do have some minor painting and renovations going over on this side. So while there is a restroom over here, we encourage you to use this one so that you don't brush up against any freshly painted walls. But in an emergency, there is an additional restroom over here. So, and is Kevin with us? Kevin Nelson is our guest. Yes. Okay. Well, Mr. Kilduff, if you'll just kind of raise your hand, I want everybody to know this is the gentleman. If you need anything throughout the day, just please find Mr. Kilduff, and he will make sure that we have a staffer to assist you. So, anyway. All right. And with that, I thank you very much and welcome to Hanover.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. I really appreciate it, Chairwoman. I also wanted to just make sure that we all acknowledge that Delegate Scott Wyatt is here to welcome us all in, and just thank you so much for having us. Did you want to just?
Sure, absolutely. We never give up an opportunity to speak to you, folks. So I want to welcome you all to the new 60th district. That will be next year, and I'll be representing this part of Hanover County in the General Assembly. Hopefully, the citizens send me back, and it's great. I have over 30 years in the telecom field, industry, and even serving on this local board. I look at all the opportunity that's there, serving on appropriations with the dollars that are now in the 2-year budget to help drive commerce here in the Commonwealth. Developers talk to us, in which they do all of you all. Is there broadband available when we go to put in a mixed-use project? So it's a lot of money and it's be a lot of applications for the VADI grants. But I will tell you, even when I served on the Board of Supervisors here, we have several conditional use permits that came before the local board where folks made application to provide broadband in city-state funding, and it never came to fruition. So these providers have got to keep their promises, and we as elected officials need to make sure we keep them so they adhere to what their commitment is to serve our localities if they're accessing state funding. So I look forward to working with all our partners. I know that folks in Eastern Hanover as well as Western Hanover and even part of my district in King William County are excited about the partnership with Dominion, Rappahannock Electric, and All Points to being a provider. And I understand in other part of my district, which we're all kind of partial to our district, Cox Cable, who represents the beach, they're making a VADI grant application in Newcastle County as well. So a lot of funding out there, and we all want increased broadband. We know there's so many unserved areas in all of our districts, and as you go more towards our rural district. So thank you all for coming to Hanover County. And now, as I told Delegate Reed, you know where to find us is.
Yeah.
I'm gonna come see you in Loudoun County. I promise. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Delegate. I appreciate your warm welcome as well. Our first order of business is to approve the minutes from our May 19th meeting. Do I have a motion to approve? Second? All righty. Do we have to have a roll call vote on this?
We'll do a quick roll
All right.
call. Delegate Byron.
Aye.
Delegate Lethbridge.
Aye.
And also Delegate Lethbridge present. Roll call. Delegate Wright.
Present.
Delegate Reed.
Aye.
Senator Boysko.
Yes.
Senator Housekeeping.
Aye.
Senator Lewis.
Aye.
Steve Sandy. Aye. Ray LaMira.
Aye.
Casey Logan. Aye. Rich Shulman.
Aye.
Jimmy Carr. Aye. Mike Culp.
Aye.
Christy Proctor.
Aye.
Secretary Merritt.
Aye.
And Beth Green on behalf of Secretary.
Aye.
Thank you. That's a unanimous in favor.
Okay, that's great. So, our first effort today, Dr. Holmes will be giving us a broadband update. If you'd like to take the floor, Doctor.
I'll just stand right here. Chandler, you're gonna click or?
Yes.
All
right, first slide, please. So I'm glad to report that the fiscal year 23 body round closed on August 25th. And so we're currently in the middle of providers putting together challenging exercises here. And so we received over 35 applications requesting $300 million in funds, looking to provide broadband access to 100,000 locations. And as you can see from the map on the presentation, that we received applications from a good geographic distribution of the state. Next slide. And so, as usual, we want to give you an update on how the body projects are going. And so we have 67 active contracts, of which 43 are currently under construction. We still have a couple of projects that are still underway that received extensions due to COVID-related delays, such as staffing and materials. And of the 35 projects that were awarded last December, 28 are officially under contract. We have about 4 that we're still waiting for the grantee to submit additional documentation, and 3 that have actually been sent out to get signatures from the county administrators. And so we're steadily moving along with closing out existing projects to get new projects under contract. The line extension customer assistance program known as VCAP, we just wanted to share an update on that as well. We received 150 applications for assistance. 28 have qualified for participation. Of the 28, 26 are currently under construction. We are waiting for income documentation for 57 applicants. And so of the applicants that have submitted applications, 17 actually do not have a broadband provider within their current territory. And of the 159 have not met the income requirements. And just to share with you, there is an exception within the VCAP program. And so while we have income limits based on zip codes, we do have the ability to waive the income requirement and go up to $133,529 per household on an individual case-by-case basis. And so we've had several families qualify through that exception. And then just to share which providers are participating, we have Breezeline, Brightspeed, Citizen, Comcast, Cox, Eastern Shore, Virginia Broadband Authority, Femtel, River Street Networks, and Virginia Technology Services. And we're currently reviewing a submission by Chantel. So just to give you an update, we all know that all things right now are focused on the new Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act, and I wanted to share where we are as a Commonwealth in terms of both the 2 buckets of funding. One is the BEAD funding, and it's known as the Broadband Equity Access to Employment Program. And so there will be $42.4 billion available through that pot of funding, of which we will get an allocation. And I'll talk a little bit about how the allocation will be determined. And so we're currently waiting on the FCC to develop the maps. That's actually how the NTIA will be distributing the allocations based on unserved locations in each state. So at this time, we are not aware of what our actual number will be. We do know that each state is eligible up for a $100 million initial allocation. There is some discussion as to the definition of initial. My definition of initial means immediately. The federal government's definition of that is very different. So we're in discussions with NCIA regarding what initial means at the federal level. Next slide. And so just where we are in the process. So as part of the application process and the funding, there are several steps that we will have to go through. And so the first step is, 1, submitting a letter of intent for the BEAD planning fund for the BEAD program, which we did, and also submitting a action plan. And so each state is eligible for up to $5 million in planning funds, of which we've applied for, and we're currently waiting for them to approve it. And so after we develop what will be a 5-year strategy for the Commonwealth to close the digital divide utilizing the BEAD funding, we're required to submit an additional proposal, a final proposal, and then we'll be allowed to implement the program. And so we're currently in conversations along with Senator Warren's staff on some waivers allowed through the initial proposal process. And part of this is because several states are just standing up broadband programs. We already have an established broadband program, and so we want to seek a waiver to, right now they're proposing to get 20% of your allocation. We're proposing to receive more than 20%, and so we're currently waiting. We actually have a call scheduled next week with NTIA to discuss waivers for the Commonwealth. And so also as part of the BEAD program, Governor Youngkin has established an HCD as a lead on all things broadband related to the Infrastructure Act, including BEAD. We submitted our application, and so the 3 things that we're going to focus on through the planning process: 1, We need to tweak the body program to, take into consideration the federal requirements for the BEAD program. We're, already hearing from providers regarding some of the requirements, like things of now there's a 25% match requirement. Bodies currently have a 20% match requirement. There's we're also hearing about requirement of letter of credit. And so for your smaller and mid-sized internet service providers, letter of credits are concerned because we have to come up with 25% match. And what we're hearing is that some of them are looking at a 30% letter of credit. So almost 55% of the cost, we have to rebate them in terms of having cash and then also getting a letter of credit from a financial institution. On top of that, several of them are also hard-off participants. And so that was a requirement for that program as well. And so we will steadily figure out how we want to adapt the body program to fit some of the key requirements. The other thing is the climate resiliency planning department. So as you all know, we're part of the Chesapeake Bay, and so with the federal money, we want to be mindful of any guidelines and regulations that we have to be compliant with. And there's several other whole host of regulations that we're going through, along with our association partners at the Virginia Telecommunication Industry Association, with VCTA. And so we're all kind of just patiently waiting to figure out how to turn body into a federal program. The good thing is that we still have a budget for the biennium, and so we still have state funding that allows us to still remain flexible in the types of projects that we're able to fund. The other piece is exploring workforce development needs, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. And so one of the things we've heard from all the providers and their respective associations is the labor shortage. And so we've been in conversations with the community college system. We know that several community colleges have stood up broadband related training programs. And so we're trying to figure out how do we replicate those programs across the Commonwealth. We recently had a great conversation with Southside Virginia Community College. They actually started the program at the start of 2023. And so we're going to be working through identifying workforce development needs. We've also heard from Virginia 811, which used to be this utility. And so not only have we identified workforce development needs for actual build out of broadband, but also related to things like identifying utilities. And so there's as we all know, there's a labor shortage in a lot of industries, but also within the 811 companies that have to go identify existing fiber, existing utilities, gas lines, and things of that nature. And so the last thing is we're going to be providing grant funding to help local governments plan for broadband affordability and adoption. So we're continuing to invest in broadband expansion from an infrastructure standpoint. We've also got to start focusing on affordability and also broadband adoption. And so the BEAD funding will allow us to start assessing the resources. And so we know there's a lot of local nonprofits doing great work within the state around digital literacy. And so we'll work with the for identifying opportunities for utilizing the BEAD funding for non-deployment as well. And then, so we're currently working again on a waiver process with the federal government so we can develop our timeline for utilizing the BEAD funding.
Do we have questions from members before you move on? Yeah, Delegate Byron.
Wow, you've said a lot. I'm trying to catch up with you to just kind of see where we're going here. Okay, so the 150 applications for the LEAP program, is that what it is?
Yeah.
You got. And you have only 28 qualified, but you are also awaiting information from 57 of them.
Yes.
As a lot of the things that you're bringing up are good because as we develop this program right from the beginning, we look for those barriers and then try to overcome what those barriers were at this point to be able to do things. I tend to have a different opinion on whether or not that should be income-based because it is more, to me, it's more of a question of some of those areas that we tried to deploy broadband that were more challenging terrain and other things like that. So some of the challenges, I mean, we had some of that at Smith Mountain Lake where you had somebody that got broadband right next door. And it doesn't seem like it's an issue of fairness when you have someone that you think is capable of paying $20,000 or whatever that may be. I think that we should, whether or not it's appropriate in the Broadband Advisory Council to make recommendations that we recommend the governor put extra money in the budget for that program. If there's a way you can identify what type of costs, those applications that you've gotten, I don't know if enough people are aware of it or if that's the extent of what you think that you're going to need for covering those folks that got missed in the deployment.
So that's one. The other, with the federal government and their program, I have to say, I haven't been following that closely. I figured you would bring us up to speed. How do they in broadband define equity? It's used a lot. I just want to know what the definition is.
So I'll talk a little bit about, there is a digital equity program, and I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. So we know that. In terms of LEAP, actually this, I was presenting to the Government Relations Summit for the Virginia Cable Television Association earlier this week. And so that WECAP came up and the question about the income cap. And so we do know as part of the legislation for the WECAP program, it does mention that we have to focus on low and moderate income families to not define that. And so we, in the definition of creating the moderate end of the scale, we did define it more towards middle class, which is why we can go up to 133,000 plus for the income limit. It would have to be something that would have to go back to the administration to make a change to the program, because that was defined in the allocation of the ARPA fund.
Yeah, it's budget language, so.
Well, if you can give us some information regarding what that pool is and try to put some numbers on that, that would be very helpful. And then I have one more question. Right here. The workforce development you were talking about, which is something that I was just made aware of with some tobacco commission grants. And it's probably the one you were referring to because they listed this as a particular training that they were talking about inside. Are you referring to training for laying cables inside structures or outside, which is generally, well, we're talking two different things because utilities are the ones, I don't know if they're doing their own training or if we're just talking about inside. And then number two would be, did you approach the workforce board about getting this listed as a demand job to the workforce incentive stuff too?
So regarding the conversation with BCCS, I'm actually going to lead the channel a little bit because he's been on the lead, but to describe the program that Southside is implementing, and I do know they're going for tobacco funding, so we talked about how we could be a financial resource to replicate that program. I want to say it may be utility related and broadband deployment for construction exterior as well.
Indoors and outdoors.
Indoor and outdoor, okay.
Two separate partnerships there. One is with the Association of Broadband Electrical. That's more focused on the deployment aspect of broadband infrastructure. The second is a partnership with Microsoft that Southside Community College has.
Yes, that's
More so on the data center indoor fiber optic side of things.
And so it's hitting both. We heard from several of the industry representatives which are actually in this room the need for fiber technicians and fiber splicers in the field, even as we're constructing, and then also on operators and make the cable side of the projects are.
But if it's listed on the demand jobs, then it gets covered under the workforce incentive grant funds. So it needs to be, and you can do your own submission for that that's not already on there.
Thank you for sharing. I was going to do that.
Right. Thank you so much, Christy Proctor.
Yeah, just a really quick question. First, thank you for your work that you guys are doing. But to go back to LECAP, to Delegate Byron's point, I know that you all had an open public period for folks to submit comments. And I know that my group, as well as other agricultural-based groups, had submitted comments surrounding the fact that farm communities, while the income for an individual is different if you're a farmer, obviously it's a pass-through in most cases or an S corporation. So I didn't know if there was any consideration made, and that may be a legislative issue, but I just wanted to keep raising that because I think that particularly for the farming community, you know, an income looks different than it does for necessarily an individual property owner. So
Yes, so we did make concessions in the body guidelines as long as the property where the final section needed to be completed was their primary residence. And so we are working with exceptions for folks that are in agriculture.
So if they could prove their S corp status, then there would be an exception made to the income limit.
To that.
We look at individual tax forms. We've had this on a couple of cases now with ag operations. They show us what their income may be. Maybe it's $500,000. Well, there's $400,000 expenses, right?
Right,
So
right.
we're just looking at their income, not their gross sales, not what they're making at their ag operation, what their take-home income is.
Delegate Reed.
Yes, thanks, Dr. Holmes. The question I have for you is on slide number 11. You talked about making changes to the VADI program to be able to accommodate BEAD funding. And I guess what I'm curious about is, are you actually talking about changing VATI or actually having two different programs? One that is VATI as we know it now for state funding and VATI for the federal funding.
And so that's some of the feedback we will want to hear from the stakeholders once we have a better handle on all the requirements for these. And so it may be that our stakeholders may want to run two completely different programs, one with state funding and one with the federal funding. And so that will be part of this discussion as we build the plan, as we're flying it to get the body program eligible for the new funding.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I have one. Could you give us some examples in your LECAP applications of folks who did not qualify so that we can just understand, because it looked like pretty big.
So most of what we saw, what I know recently from off the top of my head, most of the folks were above the 133,529, and so there may have been a family that their household income might be 154,000. And so folks haven't asked us, could they pay a portion of the cost? And so right now, based on how the program is established, we're able to pay a proportion of a cost for a family with that specific income guidelines. So typically they're about 20 to 30,000 higher than the 133,000.
So would one of the options be, if we were going to change that, to create a sliding scale to make it more affordable? Would that be an option? Or, I mean, I live in an area where if you make $133,000, you're not wealthy, and you're probably spending every dollar of it on transportation and childcare and housing. I mean, it's just, that's not making a rhetorical statement here. That's, you know, I wouldn't have an extra $20,000 in my pocket to fill that up. So I agree with my colleagues where I think we need to think about that and consider a possible change to that. I know we look to you all to give us some good data.
So we can share that. The program, so VCAP actually, we borrowed that program from Vermont. And so Vermont, they utilized some state CARES Act money to stuff. It was a short-term funding solution in Vermont. And so they did have a proportional requirement in their program. So it's not a fully big, we cover 100% of costs. They did a proportional based on the household income. And so we can share information with you from what we learned from the Vermont program, how we were trying to build the VCAP program within the confines of the legislation.
Great, thank you. So you have more to,
Yes.
if there are no other questions on this portion, if you would like to continue.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to equity. So regarding digital equity, so each state will get an application of planning funds. And so we will receive $1.2 million in planning funds to develop the state's Commonwealth Digital Opportunity Plan. And so to your point, Delegate Byron, we actually get to define equity and how we want to implement a plan within the state. So we've submitted the application from the planning funds. We have received notification, not officially from NCIA, but we got an email from Senator Warner's staff, and so it's been favorable. So once we receive the official letter, we will share that with you all. And so over the next 270 days, once we get the official work notice, we'll be developing the state's strategy for implementing the Commonwealth Digital Opportunity Plan. And it's more focused on helping around broadband adoption again, looking at broadband affordability. And so one of the things that we'd like to note, and I'll share a little bit about it shortly, with House Bill 1265, we are currently developing the broadband affordability and cost effectiveness plan. And so by doing some of that study work up front, we feel like that particular work, which we'll present to the General Assembly and the Governor's Office at the end of the year, will position us with helping to fully develop our Commonwealth Digital Opportunity Plan. And so stay tuned for more information on that. Hopefully we'll get an official letter in the coming days. And so we're on the be the arrow with us that they review and improve. So far, we've heard that we're in good standing. And so we'll be developing the plan. And again, it's even very similar to what I shared about the complete planning process. This particular funding, each state will receive an allocation to actually do a grant program. And anyone, once we submit our plan, any entity in Virginia will have access to federal and competitive funds as well. And so there's two ways to get funding once we develop our statewide plan. Any additional questions about that? And so DHCD is the lead on the digital equity program. We'll be preparing the digital opportunity plan, which will conduct a needs assessment of digital opportunity efforts in the state. And we'll develop a plan to how we're going to address the identified needs. And so as I said earlier, through the B funding that we will receive, which is $5 billion, we're going to pass approximately $3 million of that funding to local governments to develop their own digital opportunity plans. And so the last couple of slides are really focused on legislative directives. And so you'll hear more about this particular House Bill 445 and Senate Bill 446, broadband service to new development study. So I don't want to steal the policy office thunder as they present to you this afternoon. And so you all are the first ones to, outside of the stakeholder advisory group, to hear from the team on the recommendations and findings. So we're going to go ahead and skip that one. The next one I talked a little bit about a few minutes ago, House Bill 1265 and Senate Bill 716, developing the broadband affordability plan. And so we will be delivering this plan by December 1st to both the General Assembly and the governor's office. And so it requires us to look at options of affordable broadband connectivity in the state, recommendations on how we leverage the federal grants. Ironically, we have a lot of money forthcoming through the infrastructure investment program, and best practices for establishing an affordability program, taking into consideration things like the Lifeline program at the federal level, the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is a $30 month subsidy, and then recommendations for public health reach. And so stay tuned for more information on that as well. Oh, and the very last one is Senate Bill 724, the broadband annual report. And so this is where we're working in partnership with the Virginia Department of Education, where they've actually incorporated broadband access and affordability questions in their fall student record collection process. So if you have school-age child in the Commonwealth of Virginia, when you fill out your information each year for your child's school, you'll see questions regarding broadband access and affordability. So each school board is required to provide the data to the Department of Education by December 31st each year for the next 3 years. And so they're currently collecting the data. We anticipate we'll have it by December 31st. We are working on a data sharing agreement with the Department of Education because student data is considered private at the federal level. And so we're working on getting that established with them so we can get the data. The other thing is because it's part of the student records collection, there may be some concern around response rate. And so we talked to the Department of Education about a second pronged approach where we see that maybe the broadband questions weren't effectively answered by families. We would target it out to specific school districts and work through those school districts to maybe do a supplemental survey to collect the data. And so last couple of updates from the Office of Broadband. So we are in the middle of finalizing our grants management handbook. So for those of you providers and counties that have grants, stay tuned for our handbook. We are also involved in the fabric challenge process for the forthcoming federal communications back. I can't say much about that. We did sign a licensing agreement, and so we will be. What I can say is we will be challenging the location-based information that came up from the FCC, and this is to ensure that every single address in the Commonwealth is included in their fabric. The other thing is, and you'll see it on the slide up here, county and city broadband profiles are coming out next. Oh gosh, it's next week. And we want to give you an example of one. So B County is on this slide. And so for B County, the Senate District, the Lincoln District, the House District, the first, and then the Gulf Virginia Region 1. And so what you'll see here is that there are 5,547 locations with broadband, 8,300 without broadband. And so through the LIDE program, we will be connecting 5,638 locations. The localities put in $1.4 million in match. And so the partner in the VIDE project has been Scott County Telephone and then contributed $2.1 million. And so they're projected to complete their project by November 15th of 2023. So we're developing these for every single locality of the Commonwealth. So stay tuned for more information on that. Just a footnote, you may notice that there's a difference between locations without broadband and which locations are covered through VIDE. Please remember the private sector is also still making investments in broadband expansion. And so in the numbers, we cannot directly account for if there's another provider in that region doing broadband build out. And so over time, because of the broadband availability map and the reporting, we'll be able to start filling in the maps in these localities.
Thank you. Delegate 3 had a question.
Dr. Holmes, simple question, but
Yeah.
in the Senate and House districts that you're using, are you using the current ones or the ones that will be in effect next year?
I'm going to mention my staff because I know for the broadband ability map, we have to use the current districts. For these, what are we using?
I'll get back to you.
Because as Delegate Wyatt pointed out, this will be the new 60th district, right?
Excellent question.
I'll check in on the break.
And we'll see if we just may have to like maybe leave them all for the first duration. Because there is some, well, we'll talk about that internally, because it's by county, so we will work on that internally.
Excellent.
Casey, you had a question?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
Dr. Holmes, as far as the fabric challenge process, us in the local, we're on our own service territories and things like that. Is there anything we can do as providers to help the state with that challenge process as far as identifying locations, underserved, things like that?
Sure, so you all can actually sign up to get access to the fabric as well. And so we have a tier 2 license agreement as a state government. And so you all can sign up to get access to the fabric. One of the things we've been talking about internally is that we have noticed that there's discrepancies by specific localities. I can't say which ones, but we are going to be contacting the county specifically that we've identified where there's been a more than 50% between the region database, which we know is not 100% accurate, and what we see in the fabric. And so we want to utilize local county data or secondary data the localities we have on actual E911 locations. And so you may be asked as part of a county since you're cooperative, and so you all have addresses with data as well. So you may be asked by a county. I know in my previous work doing community development, we worked with Dominion Energy in Floyd County to find out households that were not vacant. And so they utilized the electric meters being on at a home because it's not on. I know I just gave the ticket. I started facing it.
No, they don't share that with me. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I don't know if it comes up, but we shared it with Wayne County. So we will be reaching out to localities. We're still combing through the fabric with Virginia Tech as well. And so the irony is I don't even know what I can talk to other states about, because I don't know if there's a trend across the country in addresses missing. And so stay tuned for more information on that, because if you're in an area that we've identified as a discrepancy in locations, you may be asked to assist us in challenging the data. And then the other thing is, we all know you all submitted your broadband service territory data, and so I guess at some point the FCC will be mapping that, and we'll have to challenge that as well. So you will most likely be challenging both the fabric and the service data. So a lot of challenges.
Yeah, we're just starting.
Question?
I would just observe, I think we've got access to the preliminary federal data, most providers do under all kinds of confidentiality, but it's clear we're using a different denominator for where locations are. In Virginia, we have VGen. It's not perfect, but it's an awfully good GIS-based data set that says, according to counties, and they're supposed to report it on a quarterly basis, these are where there are locations in our jurisdiction. And I guess it doesn't appear that the federal government is using the same.
Yeah.
So I think this is an area where to get an accurate map, private providers are going to have to work with the state to make sure that we show as many unserved locations as remain, so that Virginia can get every nickel that it's entitled to. This is such a big effort.
And so one of those we have done, and the great thing about the partnership with Virginia Tech is because they do so much GIS for the state. So one of the things we talked about was there's actually a database of FEMA addresses for FEMA. Like if there's a disaster in Virginia, there's actually a list of addresses and buildings that would be part of like a FEMA grant. And so we've been talking to Virginia Tech about even existing secondary data sources at the state level before we start reaching out to localities for data. Because as you guys know, you all are looking throughout the state. GIS and availability of data varies depending on where you're at within the state. Is that my last one, Taylor? Is it down here, Terry? Yes. And so I'm not going to steal Chandler's thunder, but now Chandler's going to unveil the body project dashboard.
Appreciate it, Tamara. A couple of housekeeping suggestions before we get started. I would suggest, Senator, that we break for lunch after the dashboard presentation. Just grab, go get up out of the break room over here to the right, come back in, we'll stop for 15 minutes just to have a working lunch afterwards. Get folks home sooner before the rain really sets in. Just a suggestion for the Broadband Council. Okay. So the dashboard demonstration. This is the first time we're unveiling the body project dashboard today at the Broadband Advisory Council meeting. We'll do a demonstration here in a second, but from a historical perspective to begin, this dashboard was established originally when the General Assembly allocated American Rescue Plan dollars to be managed and awarded to the body program. Along with that was the establishment of this dashboard. It was continued through future body rounds through this state budget bill, this past cycle budget bill. So it includes those body investments currently from the FY21 process. Those were announced back in January and March of 2021. It also includes the announcement of the $722 million in body projects that happened back in December of 2021. So that is about 96% of all body investments, not including FY17 through FY20, of course. The majority of those projects are already completely closed out. So two purposes for the dashboard. One is the residents can stay informed of project development. The number one thing we hear from folks in our office is, hey, am I included in project one? And two, when's it coming to me? So we can share this as a resource with folks that want that information, and it's the best we have to show progress of these projects as they make their way across the Commonwealth. And the second, of course, is stakeholders that are involved in how these projects play out. So with that, I'm going to hopefully click this hyperlink and see if it'll pull up the dashboard demonstration. This will go public later on this afternoon. So if you want to feverishly write the URL down, it's going to come out later today as well.
Let's take a picture of it.
And we're going to get it up online for Google Eats folks as well. So just bear with us here. And so the first thing we want to do is point out all the projects that are under contract with the HCD as of late August 2022, as of about a month ago, are highlighted in some sort of color, right? Those projects that aren't yet under contract, we haven't had a chance to update the dashboard since they got under contract, are shaded in gray, but it still shows, hey, there's a broadband agreement that's in the kitchen working, coming to eventually be under contract for your area. So I want to highlight a couple of features of the dashboard to start. The first of which is you can hover over a project in the area. I'm hovering over Beckford County here. They have a project underway in the, let me see if I can zoom the proper way here. We'll just zoom in. They have a project underway with Sidecell in the western portion of the county. So you can scroll in here to the map. As you hover over the Sidecell project, it'll show the rough statistics of that project. So the applicants, Bedford County, the co-applicant Sidecell, they were awarded in 2022, funding awarded 4,100 locations in the project area. And what's the maximum available speed that will be available to folks in that project area? So the legislation from both of those budget bills that were mentioned also calls for more advanced statistics in form of projects. So I've scrolled over to the project between Cumberland Plateau PDC and Point Broadband. This is their first project, not the one that was awarded in December, but the one that was awarded in January 2021. And if you select the project in the dashboard, it'll pull up a statistics page that'll allow you to see what stage of development that project is in. So moving from left to right with those top three boxes, we've got fiber mileage. So we can see out of the total agreement, there's 672 miles of fiber that are going to be deployed. Of that, Point Broadband has completed 221 of those miles to date, 33% of the project. Under locations, there's 7,800 locations in the project area. Point Broadband has provided broadband access to 3,765 of those locations as of the last monthly report submitted to DHCD. Internally speaking, that's how we collect this information. Folks have to submit monthly reports to our office. We take that information from monthly reports, upload it to the dashboard, and keep folks informed about how the project's going. This orange box is the timeline box. The contract start date for this project was back in August of 2021. It's a 2-year agreement, so it's projected to be complete in August of 2023. 56% of that timeline has expired to date. And then lastly, on funding, this project is going like we require, a proportional spend down of funds on the body side of the budget, as well as the total match funding side of the budget. So that $11.7 million is a combination of funds from the PDC, the localities that are involved in the project, as well as Point Broadband. And then lastly, for the engineers down here at the bottom, we've got the individual project phases that are a part of the project. So we know that Point Broadband is almost complete with the planning phase here of this project. So I'll zoom in just for folks in the room. They've completed field design and engineering. They've completed the walkout Still working on permit and applications for those remaining 3,500 locations. They're still going to pass before the deadline of the contract. Yeah, this is what we got.
So the permit, can I ask a question? Madam Chair?
Sure.
So the permit applications and make ready, the areas that we'll talk about, do they show where they're at in progress or just shows them?
So the way we have the form established now is that it can respond to 3 options. Those 3 options at the bottom, not starting in progress.
But you have been.
This shares the most detailed information we have. We don't have exactly out of how many permits they plan on procuring throughout the project. We don't have how many total they plan on doing, nor do we have how many they have done to date.
Okay, so it doesn't break it down with the project.
But going on to the execution phase, this shows generally where the project is at. They've actively splicing fiber, actively doing on-site electronic installation. And then these last 3 bullets here that they've not started, of course, they haven't made service available to all locations to date. They've still got about half to go. And then after construction has been completed, we have a process of closing out each project to track adoption of broadband in the project area, among other things. That's the detailed project statistic page of the dashboard. Just to go to a 2022 project, we're going to scroll over to the Eastern Shore Virginia Broadband Authority's award. And this project, one that was awarded in fiscal year 22, the start date of that contract was June of this year, projected to be complete by the end of May 2024. And here are the statistics of that project. They haven't, as you can see, the budget information isn't yet there. That's because they haven't submitted a draw down of grant funds to our office yet. But we know based on their last monthly report, they spend some amount of local government or broadband authority funds as a part of that project. That completes the formal side of the demonstration. Senator?
Thank you for, I'm really impressed with that. I know that we hear more about this, what's going on from our constituents and from local governments. And this is going to be really helpful. Deborah, you had a question?
Yes, thank you very much. For this, how often is the data updated and who updates the data?
The legislation requires a quarterly update of the information to this map. We can explore doing it more frequently, but this is an internal to DHCD process. We work with our IT team to get this stood up. So it's a stuff, sending an email over and saying, hey, run an update. We've got the data ready and it'll be uploaded.
So a follow-up question. So then the providers or the stakeholders then provide that information to you and then you input it in. So it's not one of those things where it's like, as they are updating the project, they input the stuff and it automatically populates to the dashboard.
Not at this time. It's not a live update. Okay. Those monthly reports are due on the 15th of every month. We go through, make sure that the information is legitimate. It's a scrubbing process to make sure no red flags are on each project. And then after that is when we'll be ready to upload.
Okay, great. Thank you for the presentation. Did I hear you correctly that this was going to be released this afternoon
It will.
publicly? Is there going to be kind of public messaging that we can help to amplify so that our constituents know about it and start taking a look at it?
We'd be happy to write up draft messaging to send out. But this is going to come out through our constant contact, email blast system through DHCD. But we're happy to draft up some messaging to send out.
That'd be helpful.
And I know when we launched the map, the governor's policy office forwarded the map language to every single legislator in the moment. So we work with the governor's policy office. We push out the message this afternoon. The other thing Sheila did not share, and I'm not sure if this one has, so you also can click on the internet service provider's website. I'm not sure if ESPB's link is working, but you can actually, so each of the providers are also building pages with the localities on the progress of the projects and also how to sign up for service. And so you'll see ESPBA has a link to their website and they have their own dashboard. And so every single project either points directly to the internet service provider partners website or the county. And so some of the counties have taken that on as part of their IT as well.
Thank you, Chair. Great job, you guys. It's wonderful to see this come to light. I think one of the benefits of this will be that the providers are going to have to submit accurate data into CAMS and on time. Because what we can do with this is use it as an example. Here's a powerful performance by ISP1 compared to a less than performing ISP2. This dashboard will definitely provide us with that type of needed reporting process. So really appreciate it. Just one quick question. I didn't see we had a question at our Broadband Authority meeting Wednesday night about address searching. There's always been a question of accuracy. I put my address in the system. It comes back and it shows me numerous ISPs, but none of them actually provide service. This will be a better tool. In reality, none of them provide service where my address shows up as having service. So that's my address. Okay, my address. I'm just wondering how this particular tool can be utilized for that. So at least, is there an address lookup? That's probably the biggest question.
I think that's something we need to take back. Right now, we have polygons.
Okay.
Right, so general project areas where folks can see, generally, are they in a polygon or not, based on their address. Publishing points is something that we have to see if we can do internally based on our GIS systems.
And also if we're not violating any FOIA exemptions we've given for specific data on visits. And so there are a couple of ISPs, I mean, you all be amenable to that data being public. I'm looking at Jimmy and Jimmy's looking at me. But I know
I mean, the
probably
shape files are already publicly available.
The point is,
The operational concerns, you get the typical customer browser tries to you need a lot of processing power to go back and forth between a massive point shape file, especially for a venue that covers every point in Virginia. So I think some link between this and the broadband availability, I'm not a developer, but I think it's going to be very difficult to complicate this by adding a map. I mean, this is supposed to be a project dashboard, how much money's been spent, how are we doing, and my suggestion would be that the point stuff should be on the map website.
Yeah, I would add, like, we have the new map that shows, and you can go down to that address again, correct? So perhaps we have the locals.
Yeah, maybe a link over or something.
Yeah. Very impressive, thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee? Okay, thank you very much.
Great.
So, as you suggested, we're gonna take a 15-minute break and have some lunch. Is that right?
Yes, we have lunches for Broadband Advisory Council members. But those folks will rotate through the, kitchen area over here through this wall. Pick up lunch, come back in, we'll get started back in 15 minutes. Anybody have the time now?
It's 12 o'clock.
We'll start back at 12:15.
Thank you. HB 445, or Senate Bill 436, to hear about the work group, outcomes. Grace, if you would like to get started on that.
I will. Let me share my screen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Most of you know me by this point, but I'm Grace Wooten. I am a senior policy analyst with our policy and legislative department in VHCD. I've been working with Chandler on this study and helping them throughout the stakeholder advisory process. So just before we begin, I do want to acknowledge and thank everyone who contributed to this report. It was a stakeholder advisory group report, and we would really just like to thank everyone who was on that stakeholder advisory group for their participation and their cooperation and the assistance they provided us as staff throughout this process. We really appreciate it and really enjoyed getting to work with you all. And then also I want to, DHCD at least, it's a team effort. We had a lot of assistance from staff with governor's office on this. We're very appreciative of that. In particular, if Cole, could you raise your hand and wave? Cole McAndrew is our Virginia Management Fellow here with the Office of Broadband, and he was instrumental in helping us do the research and help us organize this process throughout. So I just really wanted to take a moment to acknowledge his contributions to the report. So with all that out of the way, let's get started. So the flow of the report is going to be very similar to that of the flow of the presentation is going to be very similar to that of the report. We're going to go over the legislative directives that both the stakeholder advisory group had along with the department had. Then we're going to kind of go into what the work the SAG did, the stakeholder advisory group did, and then we're going to go back to what the department did. So the report, which you all should have at this point, the report itself, the way it goes, we have an executive summary. We go over the history of broadband and expansion of Virginia. If you guys are okay with it, we're going to skip that portion today's afternoon. I think we're all kind of want to get out of here and skip the rain. Then again, the report goes over the legislative history of directives, goes over the advisory group work, goes over the department, and we're going to follow very similar. So to start first with what the legislative directive of the stakeholder advisory group was, and also of the department. So as directed in legislation, DHCD needed to convene a stakeholder advisory group in order to study how best to expand broadband, how to facilitate the expansion of broadband into new development. And the stakeholders were supposed to go ahead and do some research on what was out there and try and identify local policies, ordinances, or changes to state policy that could be made in order to do so. As directed by legislation, we were sort of instructed to include in that stakeholder advisory group representatives for the development, so both residential and commercial, local governments, high-speed internet providers, and then other stakeholders as we thought we would need to get the best product to you all. We in total had about 13 stakeholder advisory group members. Again, we're very appreciative for all the effort and assistance they provided us. Additionally, the stakeholder advisory group was not a public body. That said, all of our meetings were open to the public, and we did get additional engagement through those avenues as well. You can also see on the presentation here, we had 3 meetings in total of the stakeholder advisory group. The purpose of each of those meetings is kind of outlined above. So we had one in June, just kind of as an introduction and establish the scope of work. We had a second one that we did additional discussion, thinking about and brainstorming what recommendations they want to bring forward, or the stakeholder advisory group they want to bring forward. And the final meeting was really discussing those and then deciding what we wanted that report to look like.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
I would just, maybe they could put, how many hours
that
we
would be.
spent on that.
I would be happy to hear how many hours it was.
Countless. I think we should also have a statistic on there of who was on the most stakeholder advisory group in total. There are many of the representatives working with that. In terms of this slide here that I have online at least, and forward, this is just a timeline roughly of when we did it. So we had when the bill was signed into law, when the first meeting was, the second meeting, and we are at our deadline, so we're very happy to be sending this report here to you guys today. I'm going to go now, hand it off to Chandler to go over the stakeholder advisory group stuff, and then I'll pick back up later to do the findings. Thank you.
So the first point under this category, just to review quickly, the legislative directive of the advisory group was. Those break down into three things. First, compile information about existing ordinances, development standards. Secondly, making recommendations on local ordinances, policies, and procedures that were effective in aiding broadband deployment. Third of which were identifying consensus changes to existing state law that facilitate broadband deployment to new residential and commercial development. So we wanted to take a brief moment to highlight what the research of the advisory group was. Again, this goes back to that directive to compile information on existing ordinances. So as the HPD staff, the advisory group working together, kind of took a three-level approach to all levels of government to see what was out there to help aid in broadband expansion and development. That is, all those things are enclosed in the report. We won't go over the details there, but it's examples from the state of Ohio, city of Boston, and then federal HUD as well. And one thing of note too, that the advisory council pointed out as well to us repeatedly, and we appreciate, is that Virginia continues to be a leader on broadband expansions in unserved areas. So that was a rallying point that we have brought together to focus on how do we make sure that new areas aren't left behind as new development occurs. So to focus on what the recommendations of the advisory are, as following, and this is a process-based slide. So talking through how DHCD staff drafted and interpret recommendations from the advisory group. After the first meeting, staff presented a series of recommendations. These were also based on individual meetings with individual advisory group members. Staff presented a list of draft potential recommendations at the July meeting to the stakeholder advisory group. Based on the feedback we received on that list of draft potential recommendations, there were about 12 of them. We narrowed those down to 3 possible consensus recommendations. We presented those 3 possible consensus recommendations last week, the last meeting of the stakeholder advisory group, and did not interpret that consensus was achieved on any of the 3 recommendations. That's not to say that the work there on this advisory group didn't reach consensus on any items, but Grace is going to highlight on the next couple of slides what the findings of the department are that showed where the work the advisory group is channeled to throughout this process.
So to move forward to the department's reviews of these findings and recommendations, before we go into the findings, I do want to note that we definitely, the findings are based upon the totality of all the things that we observed throughout the stakeholder advisory process. So this is all the meetings we had, all the individual interactions we had, all the feedback that was solicited before and after. Like, as to note, there were many hours spent on this. We had a lot of feedback. So this is, our findings are based off of our observations of all of those things. So to review the legislative directive of DHCD, definitely, again, the first one relates to us having convened a stakeholder advisory group. But the second bullet point here is that we shall report our findings and recommendations to you all today. So that's what I'm going to go over. So in terms of the findings, we had 3 findings that just kind of observed and came to over the course of the stakeholder advisory group process. So the first of these here is that the members of the advisory group, they vary greatly in the perceived urgency of this problem and the necessity to address it. This is not to say that there aren't challenges in expanding broadband and community development. We in fact asked all the stakeholder advisory group members before the first meeting to answer a couple of questions for us. One of the questions was, what are some of the challenges that come with expanding broadband? And trust me, we got an answer from everyone on all of those things. However, the issue here is that many of them differed in, again, the necessity or the urgency to address these problems. We had some stakeholder advisory group members who believed that these problems were kind of concurrent with normal business costs or would be addressed naturally over time as the current process continued. And while others also differed in that opinion, and they frankly believe that they were a greater barrier to broadband expansion, or they definitely needed to be addressed. So again, there was just a difference between what the urgency was and how this was going to be addressed, or if it needed to be addressed, and that was something we saw throughout the stakeholder advisory process. Our second finding is that that the department found was that the authority of local governments to act independently in regards to broadband expansion is unclear. So as a Dillon rule state, if something is not explicitly stated in code, a locality is going to face an ambiguity when they go about trying to take action. In terms of local government's ability to even expend their own revenues to expand broadband and community development, that is not something that's explicitly stated in code, and therefore localities are going to, or some believe that localities face issues or we're going to face an ambiguous environment if they were going to choose to do that. Other stakeholder advisory group members definitely disagree with that, and so that was something that was not clear over the course of our 3 meetings. And then finally, many of the members' primary concern about, like, when it came to expanding broadband development was related to how to address potential funding gaps. So similar to what the issue that Rodney is addressing right now, there are challenges in expanding broadband current development. Those issues also are exhibited in expanding broadband development. There are some areas that are just financially difficult to get to, and many members of the group were concerned or different as to how to address that funding gap. Some thought that maybe there should be state programs that should be modified or expanded in order to completely address this issue, but they differed as to the if and how that should be done. So those are our 3 primary findings related to that. Unless there are questions, I'm going to move on to the recommendations.
I do have a question. On the first one, where you talked about the lack of perceived urgency, is that one of the things where it's like there are just certain stakeholders or certain jurisdictions that don't perceive this to be a big deal at all?
I don't think that we would say that. I think that not necessarily a big deal. Like, if this is our problem, we have citizens who don't have broadband, it needs to be addressed. But rather, these problems are going to solve themselves over time, just given what the state is currently doing and the actions that are currently being taken. You don't need to change trajectory to fix these issues.
Yeah, an example of this, we had a representative from the commercial development space on the advisory council.
Yeah.
What was commonly shared with us there was that the commercial development asset is going to be available.
They won't need to if it has to. So
Yeah, that's why it wasn't perceived to be as much of an urgent issue on the commercial development side.
Okay, thank you.
So to move forward, so our recommendations definitely come from our findings, and they are based upon that. And that's when you look at our findings, we're like, well, what can we do about these things? This is how we think about our recommendations. So the first is set based in that second finding about the ability for a local government to use their own resources to expand broadband is unclear. So that this recommendation is that the General Assembly should consider clarifying the Code of Virginia to give localities this express authority to expend local revenues, so to use their own resources on broadband deployment. We believe that this would help kind of solve and clarify the ambiguity that definitely keeps localities from participating or using their resources as fully as they possibly could to expand broadband in their own area. So we do also would note that we would think that this would be best as a local option because the locality itself is going to know best whether or how to expend their own revenues to make this happen in their own area. They're their experts. But we definitely think that there maybe needs to be some clarification given to those localities so they feel enabled and empowered to do this. The second recommendation is a conditional one. And so it's that if the General Assembly was going to grant localities additional authority to adopt an ordinance about deploying broadband funds for new development, they also should consider a potential cost-sharing mechanism among all stakeholders with the developer. So to take a step back from that recommendation for just a moment, this comes from our first and our third finding. So it's that people definitely disagreed on to the perceived urgency and necessity to addressing the issue. But one challenge that was commonly stated was that cost-sharing warrant, or how do we address that final funding gap when it comes to deploying broadband into new development. From that, we figured that there are this is a really complicated issue. All of our stakeholders gave us very good points about the challenges they faced when it came to addressing this issue. And so if the General Assembly was going to consider going down this avenue, they're going to try to solve this problem by granting the localities additional authority to adopt an ordinance, then we would think that it would be best to have them consider a potential cost sharing agreement such that they can fully address the complexity and the nuance and the issues of all stakeholders in this area. That we're in discussion now. Concludes our recommendations. Again, a big thank you to everyone who participated and all help from PhD and the stakeholders that have got. And I would pause for questions.
For example, what do you have any specific localities that question their ability to spend?
We heard that from local government representatives broadly, that all, emails they go, not necessarily specific. Local governments.
So I would say that at least in my experience, there have been, if there's 130 or 132 different localities, there's a different degree of risk with each one of them willing to see how far they can push the Dillon rule versus opposed to waiting for defined guidance from the General Assembly.
One of the statements we heard was that it depended on the county attorney.
Yes,
It depends on the county attorney.
and how much they're risk adverse or not. What, a question that I do have about this, when we're talking about them expending their own funds, are we talking about them expending their own funds to be a part of the current VATI program and the structure and the guardrails that exist there, or then going off on their own and developing their own program? Because if it's B, I would think that we would probably want to, in the code, put some guardrails in place that said you should go back to DHCD for expertise and best practices, because again, we don't want 133 different programs around the Commonwealth, because then you lose all kind of economies of scale and efficiencies that have been learned through this program.
And that would definitely be something the General Assembly should consider if they chose to do that, or to chose to pipeline code being, those are the guardrails they wanted to put in place. That would definitely be something that should be in that stuff for them to decide.
And again, I think we are trying to be forward thinking in these recommendations too. And I'm acknowledging right now that there is a lot of federal and state support for broadband right now, but this is, what in the future, how are we going to tackle this when in absence of state or federal, because that's not going to, always be something maybe down the road, like in 15 years. So if there's a new land that's developed, like who's going to bear that cost?
And I'll just say, I carry this bill, Delegate Kathleen Murphy was the House patron. It was that thought of how do we handle this in the future if we have neighborhoods that are being developed and they're not getting the infrastructure that they need. So how do we address this? I understand the business community saying it's going to happen organically. I had a hope that we would have some sort of guidance. But if we are already allowing localities to invest in the body grants, they are using local money for infrastructure. I don't understand the difference between what we're talking about here, a locality being able to use funding and applying for body grant, where clearly they have the ability to make investments to deploy broadband. I don't see how there's a difference there.
So there have been discussions in early years of buying, could a locality pick a specific provider, maybe be a common provider based on the relationship with franchise agreements. There's also been concern about, well, if they pick one over the other, does that break state cooperative procurement? And so there's been, again, it depends on who your county attorney is, even how they interpret how you select your body partner. And most localities do put out requests for proposals without identifying body partners. And so that's been the discussion on, at least for the body applications. Are you allowed to pick one provider over another? How do you select that provider? And so most of them have referred to doing an RFP process or utilizing cooperative procurement, where the neighboring county might have already done it and they're going to adopt their cooperative procurement. So even for body, early on, we had those same exact questions about favoritism.
And were you able to come up with a solution there?
We did not offer feedback on how best the county should pick their partner. What we've seen from the best practices, most of them will put out a request for proposal.
The best practice. Other questions,
Not to belabor the point, but another piece of great work. I know it's challenging. I think one of the things that should go mentioned is that the urgency of this is not comparable to body. I mean, it's essentially developers come in, they want to develop an area. It may be served by one incumbent. So that incumbent may have done the work through a body grant. So if you're following me, it's like we've got one person, one ISP that's setting the rate. So the developer will come in and talk to an ISP. They can set whatever rate they want. And where this becomes a problem, we know the higher end houses are going to sell, but they're only going to sell if they have fiber connectivity today. You can't go anywhere, put up a development of high-end houses and expect people to buy the properties without fiber connectivity. It's just a thing of the past. But if you go toward a locality who's trying to put in an affordable housing project and the ISP is setting the rates, then it becomes much more difficult. It becomes much more difficult for the developer to make that decision to build that affordable housing. So I think that's where the localities would benefit from a little more authority to place their own funds toward projects that are more specific to lower income. So if you think about it from that perspective, there is a possibility that this going through the General Assembly will provide that sort of relief, not relief, but positive momentum. Some ISPs will actually donate. We have cases where ISPs will donate connectivity. So, you know, in some cases we're getting support already, but you know, make it more available, and I think you'll see community action from ISPs who are focused on providing community service.
Ryan, it looks like you had a question.
Yeah, I want a few comments. Again, thank you to DHC. I know this was a large task to do, and actually a lot of other issues came about as a result. But the cue off of, I was saying too, is things are happening organically already. You just said that, is that the internet service community is doing this on our own. And I will say, I think my observation over the past number of years, largely driven by the Broadband Advisory Council and the urgency, tremendous partnerships have been created through the Virginia Municipal League, electric cooperatives, the broadband community. There is a partnership that is working well. And we see a problem. We're not waiting for the legislature to pass. We're trying to solve it ourselves. And I think what we have accomplished here is a lot of other states are looking to us as that example. I would also suggest that while we have created that, local governments have that as a resource. They also have the Virginia Resource Authority as a tool in the toolbox if needed. They also have access to the Virginia Wireless Services Authorities Act, which is a tool in their toolbox if they need. And so if there are attorneys who are struggling with some of that, we'd be glad to help direct them in that area. I hear that there's potentially could be a problem, and I think, as I've chatted with Dr. Holmes, I think modification to the lead cap over time may be a solution to this as well. So I think that great work has been done. We're supportive of allowing the dust to settle on what we have accomplished here and rifle shot where we have a problem. But there are significant tools already available to governments. And I know I'm probably the poster child for some of our government networks, but the go it alone model is not a successful model. So the partnerships, I think, create value.
Thank you, Ray. I appreciate that. I mean, we've seen in history where localities went on their own and things didn't work out so well. Are there specific individuals here from the local governments who would be able to give us any input or?
I know Mike Block, if you're online, I would invite you to write your comments here. If there's anyone else from the local government who wants to provide them, Steve said.
Yeah, we want to see if Mike is on the line.
I think he is, but I'll
I think he brought up kind of a legal question. I think there is a mechanism to create an authority to do that, but I think it was the idea of streamlining that a little bit, where a county versus a town or city doesn't have quite the same options as far as working directly with an ISP without going through that procurement process. And, you know, so it could be a cumbersome, lengthy process to not look like you're picking one provider over another in that particular case. And so I think that was kind of the line of thinking there. And then just giving the implicit authority as well through the subdivision ordinance that localities can require that broadband be provided as part of the subdivision approval process, I think was another issue that maybe is there, but it wasn't implicitly clear that counties could require that as part of the subdivision approval process.
Mike, if you want to talk, you can just go ahead and just.
Ms. Wheaton, if I can just poke my head in very, very quickly, local governments, if they're thinking about this, are in the position of having to use various types of workarounds. And some of those are, probably the most common one is they'll form a broadband authority. Not so much so that the broadband authority will actually operate a broadband system. They might wind up owning some conduit or dark fiber, different things, but that's not their primary purpose. Their primary purpose is to be a pass-through of funds, because there is, this isn't just a situation where there's a Dillon rule issue. There's actually a couple of specific prohibitions on localities in code. So it's not just a Dillon rule, what's my level of risk issue, it's a, am I affirmatively prohibited? So I think that that's what a lot of localities are doing. There are also workarounds through service districts, community development authorities. And I think that some of those will eventually become well-trod paths. But in the near term, I think that you have a lot of localities who kind of just run off and say, I'll give you a grant just like I would on a community development block grant, which you can do. There's a specific statute that says that you can pass through community development block grants in certain specific ways, and you can do it. It's not nearly so clear, even though this path is still DHCD, it's still a very similar set of authorities. So perhaps in the long run, this evolves more toward being like a community development block grant where the locality oftentimes is the direct pass-through managing the grant, or it develops more like toward a VEDP issue where VEDP just says, form yourself an EDA, an economic development authority, and use that as a pass-through. Well, perhaps this evolves more toward DHCD just says, form yourself a broadband authority and use that as a pass-through. But there's a lot of risk involved right now, and a locality, maybe a locality says, you know what, I accept the risk for $2 million because I can make that up out of my general fund. But you have localities like Brunswick County, for instance, putting themselves out for $40 million when that's probably their entire general fund budget for a year. So they become more risk averse, and there's just a lot of variation in the way that things are at the local level. I hope that that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Other discussion,
I'll just point out one other thing that came up in the discussion was really the whole housing issue as well. We touched on that a little bit, is this, we really need to make sure this is a process that can flow seamlessly and that these developments will have those amenities. No development going in today is not going to have electricity, but broadband, yes or no. And again, back to the point of maybe it depends on that profit margin of what services do get put in there. And so making sure that we have those services in there is important. And looking at the resources that are available, the term I've been using is the residential site readiness fund. We do it for economic development, but maybe we need to look at something like that for housing to help us address this housing issue. And that can help, the developers and localities pay for those infrastructure costs, whether it's water, sewer, or broadband, and it gives maybe another mechanism. Maybe it's a cost share kind of program. So just another tool, in addition to body program, LECAP, others, is that, maybe there's some way to incentivize not only the broadband portion, but also the housing portion, which is a huge issue in the state as well.
Other discussion, comments, questions? Thank you very much for the presentation. Clearly, it's a complicated discussion, and I appreciate everybody's work research on the workload and all the staff. With that, I think we are going to move on to public comment. If we have anyone who's on to make public comment.
Senator Briscoe, I would like to recognize that, I know Vincent said earlier, she mentioned Cole. Cole actually is from Hanover County. So I just wanted to recognize that Cole is from Hanover County, and we're really pleased to have him in our office.
Thank you for being nice.
I'd like to recognize that we have two of our supervisors with us. My supervisor from the Cold Harbor District, Michael Hersberg, and then behind him is Sue Dibble from South Anna District. They have taken a lot of my calls about broadband,
A lot.
Yes.
A lot, a lot, a
Mike-
lot.
Mike mentioned that.
Yes.
A couple times.
Yes.
Thank
Glad to have them.
thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate having you. Anyone online have any comments, questions?
No, nothing in the chat. If you are online, and would like to unmute yourself, feel free to go ahead and provide a public comment. If not, we will assume that you all are good.
All right, here, Jimmy Carr.
So, Madam Chair, I was going to say this during new business, but I guess it's the same time. We've all seen Hurricane Ian, and obviously it's a terrible catastrophe for those communities, Florida and maybe South Carolina as well. I think this is another unfortunate example of the global supply chain issues that everyone is seeing. And all of our contracts, I was talking with Casey earlier, the number one challenge we've been talking about as an industry about meeting our obligations, delivering broadband, is the electric make-ready challenge. How many of these poles in rural areas are old, too short, too small? And upgrading those poles requires, in many cases, new transformers. A lot of the stuff that's in those transformers is from a place called Ukraine. Seriously. New poles, all of our, literally every single one of our vendor contracts at all points, and I think Casey said at the same time, your subcontractors all have in their contracts, if they have a standing emergency response contract or a mutual aid obligation, they are headed down south right now to help people in need. And I think it's, they obviously have much greater challenges in those communities than we do, but I think people should recognize that this is, just yet another challenge in terms of workforce material that we have. Virginia is fortunate that we're way ahead of other states in solving our broadband challenge, but this is going to have effects. I think that this particular storm, which I heard somebody in the news say on the way up here today, was something like the most catastrophic, most damage-producing in American history. If they have to rebuild the electric grid in the middle section of Florida, that's a lot of resources, and human beings are going to be tied up.
Thank you for that. I think we all need to be mindful of that. Byron,
That kind of touches on what I wanted to bring up too. I think that it's important that this group also continue to look at those things that are obstacles for deployment and have discussions on those, in particular from our provider and from the consumer as well. I know in my area, we've had some situations with the make ready, and I was going to ask if that was something before we go towards legislation, which I always hate to have that be the route, but we started to go there with the railroads, and I would have to say we have been very, they've been working very well with us, since we started down that route, but we never went there. So some of the problems with make ready, I don't want to get them confused with the hurricane and Ukraine, and we've had one thing after the next that we've had to deal with for the last 4 years, COVID and other things. And some of this problem has already been pre-existing, some of those things. So I think we really need to look at that. Poles have always been an issue. I mean, ever since we started broadband, there's been pole issues, but this make ready thing, that's why I asked on the that one particular dashboard we had, if it actually got down into some of that. And that's fine if it doesn't, but somewhere I'm going to be going out and doing my own research and finding out we've got projects that are getting delayed, and it isn't just here, it's happening in other areas, and they're doing things to fix it. So it's not a year waiting for make ready from some of the groups that are getting the poles ready. And if we're all set to go and you have your applications done and you're making sure you get your things done on time and we have money to spend and then we can't go out and do a job because we don't have that done, that's a serious issue. So what can you do to help with that? Or should we take a different route? Is that something within what THCD's doing that you're aware of the delays or?
I'll see the first, yeah, so Sammy Rusty is actually the Virginia Telecommunication Program Manager. And so Sammy, are you okay with responding to that question?
Sure. I mean, we've just been made aware of this probably within the last month. you know, we've actually done a bunch of site visits out here to all our 2021 projects. And, you know, that is now a common theme that we're hearing about the make-ready issues. And so I'm still wrapping my head around, you know, to propose an idea to Tamara as to the best way to try to figure out how we can help assist in, you know, mitigating the delays with that. Because, you know, you've got your natural electric standard with these poles that, you know, with Dominion coming in and APCO coming in as now a middle mile provider. If they were doing their own fiber, they'd be putting that fiber up higher in their own space. But because it's now a middle mile, they drop that down and they call that their neutral now in a lot of areas. And then all the telcos and cables below that still have to go an additional 40 inches. And so, you know, you're having, you know, incumbents who are not part of the body project having to pay to make, you know, move that stuff. You've got people who have to move it twice now because they moved it for Dominion and then Dominion or APCO leases it out to somebody else. And then they have to move it again to get that other ISP down that line. So, you know, it's something we're researching. I'm hoping to, it's one of my top priorities here within the next 30 days. I'm just, you know, getting a lot more involved in it, talking to a lot more people about it now so that, you know, we can propose something or try to find a way to mitigate it. You know, again, but being a leader in the broadband area, we're one of the first people to encounter this. So unfortunately, we can't go to other states and say, hey, what did you do to mitigate this? But what we can do is once we figure out that we can go up to other people and say, this is how we mitigated this issue, learn from, you know, our issues here. So,
And I don't think the cost of make is an issue because it is an eligible cost under a body grant given to a partner that's partnering with the locality. So for the cost, if you can cover the cost of the grant, as Tammy said, there's unintended consequences for other ISPs that are already on those poles that are currently being replaced through WAC. And so we're trying to mitigate that.
Really, I need to get my. Start rolling behind us. Distracted.
Delegate Byron has another thing.
Yes, I just following up on that discussion, because I was reading something in the news about other states that had some of the make-ready issues too. And then I also realized, unless we hear details, the devil's always in the details, and it may not be structural, it may be admin. As I mentioned, Secretary Mayor and I met with some folks about this back in February during session, and that was already talking about something that was delayed, I guess, close to, 9 months. And we were assured that some things were going to change, and that's not necessarily happening. There's a little bit of progress, but then a little bit of setback. So as more and more is deployed, is this, we just need to know how much problem it's going to be. Then also the Dominion thing, or the middle mile, whether it's Dominion or APCO, they, that was in the public interest. So now the other people that were on there are being required to lower. They're paying fees. I don't know if that's in the public interest too, or it's going to be in the public interest in the rates that they charge. So we have a lot of stuff going on that needs to be understood, and I think that this committee would be very helpful on.
So, Jimmy Carr and
Well, I'm about to list Casey. I think this is another area where actually a lot of good work and collaboration is underway in Virginia by the provider community and the pole owner community. And maybe some of us on this council could take it upon ourselves to at least, we could come back at the next meeting and give kind of an overview of how Make Ready works. There's some things we agree about, some things we don't, but just so this is going to be a big issue people are talking about in broadband for a couple of years. And I think it'd be good to have a common framework for how it works, because it is pretty complicated and it depends on whether you're an investor-owned utility or a co-op. And if that's something that the council is interested, I would be willing to work with Ray and Rich and Casey and others to see if we could put together kind of primer for this body on Make Ready in Virginia, what we agree on, what we don't.
Yeah, and just to talk about the overall issue, There's several factors. One is I know a lot of these electric utilities that are getting the pole attachment requests, they're getting 600 to 1,000 requests that they have to then internally process on their own side. Then look at the contract. Workforce right now is a big issue in the contract labor side of having enough employees to move at the speed that we want them to move that to connect the rural Virginia communities. And so it's multifaceted. I'll be, glad to work with Jimmy and the other guys to help create some kind of sketch or guidance of what's all involved. But it's a multi-layered process, and hopefully if supply chains keep up. We got poles now. If you order a pole from a vendor, you can look. It used to be a 2-week turnaround. It's now maybe a 3-month turnaround, 4-month turnaround. So everything's just getting pushed further and further back. Hopefully we can find a good solution.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick offshoot on this. There may be a way working with VDOT using a concept called micro trenching or otherwise that the poles become a thing of the past. Yes, they're there. Yes, it's easier to install in the telecom space rather than go underground. But eventually, we'd like to see communities where those poles are no longer the requirement. And there's a number of reasons for that, but it's more costly. But if we're waiting 3 months for a couple of poles to come in, why would you not just go underground? I'm glad to participate in whatever group is showing up, but there have been requests to Albemarle County to approve micro trenching appropriation, saying we're going to put money toward micro trenching in general. But it's more costly, so they need the ISPs need assistance.
Did you say you were gonna pay for it? Because
No,
I was
I
thinking that's
wouldn't.
very expensive.
Yeah.
Did you say I
You can pay to bury it all. Give me a wire and stick it to the meeting.
Thank you. I think it would be great for us to get a better handle on that. And the point of the electric companies having to address what's going on in probably South Carolina, but definitely in Florida, where they said that they have to completely rebuild the entire system, the transformers, the grid, everything. I mean, that's very troublesome for us going forward. So I think we need to be thoughtful about what our expectations are as far as getting our stuff done here. Go ahead.
And it's not just the broadband, it's also affecting just normal development as well, because we here, and I'll give you many Westlake examples where can't get the materials, can't get on the schedule, can't get just an apartment complex hooked up or some sort of business because all the assets are, being utilized somewhere else for make ready, or as Jimmy said here real soon, we're all going to be in Florida.
Yeah.
So it's having an impact even beyond broadband as well.
Is there an interest in the Broadband Advisory Council really digging into this a little bit further? Does that seem like a good priority for the next meeting?
It's gonna be legislation.
Yeah.
Comes out, but we don't got this.
Yeah. I think whatever we can do to solve problems without having legislation is always better. So if there's,
Well, my intent was, if I'm just shepherding this, which I'm happy to do with others, it wouldn't be to recommend legislation. It's
No.
to say, hey, here's the landscape.
Right.
Because it's pretty complicated.
thank you for clarifying that, because I think, again, we don't want to force legislation where there is no necessary.
So, Tamara, who keeps track? Is it just the localities that are aware, or the providers are aware if they're waiting? Who's the go-to that knows? I guess it'd be the provider then that knows their project's delayed.
This relationship is entirely between the prospective attacher and the pole owner.
So we didn't hear that from because.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Is there other business that anybody would like to bring up? Okay.
I just figure probably a good time to give you an update on this, just because there's possible legislation coming out of this that's going to affect broadband. Last year, there was some legislation that was introduced dealing with locates. So we're talking about undergrounding materials, and there was a perception that the locators were not keeping up with the work to get facilities located in a timely manner, and it was slowing down broadband deployment. So we actually put together a work group of stakeholders and folks from the State Corporation Commission. And have been having meetings probably every month to look at maybe some updates to the code dealing with underground utilities. So an example might be currently when you ask for a locate, you have to, that locate covers a mile area, let's say. Well, a locator gets out there, he knows where the project's going, but he's got to locate the entire mile because that's what's on the ticket that gets sent out. So one of the ideas was if they lessen the amount of area that has to be located, then it'll make the system more efficient. So that's one of the ideas and there are a number of these, probably a dozen of them. But the point that I wanted to raise for you all is you're likely to see legislation that will come. The SEC will be working through it, and there should be an industry consensus on some changes we think should be made to the underground utility law. This came up because we realized, and poor Tammy was at one of our meetings, and she heard this. One of our stakeholder meetings, we had utility operators, we had locators, and we also had excavators there. And we all got together and realized we've got a problem here because with the huge amount of batting money that's coming out, that money goes to the provider to build the network. But what it doesn't really account for is that whoever's facilities need to get located now are all of a sudden have to expend enormous amounts, I'm talking millions of dollars, to locate facilities statewide. And there's no reimbursement for that. It's just something that under our current law, the operators are responsible for the costs of locating their facilities. But the demands on them now have gotten to be very great because a company may come in and say, we're going to build here next week and we need you to do 500 locates, and there's one locator that's and how all of a sudden do they get all those assets there to do that? So we're looking at changes in the law to try to make the system more efficient. Tammy was at our last meeting and we talked about maybe workforce things. How do we get more folks into the locate business? What are some of the obstacles there to getting them better able to do the job so that we can keep up with the demand? Because we know that for the next probably 5 years, we're going to be looking at a lot of locates that are going to have to happen in the state as well. So anyway, I thought it was good just to give you an update as to what's going on there.
Thank you very much.
Tamara, do you have the money in front of you as far as how much money is left? How much is there for the upcoming? Do you have a balance on the amount of money?
Now, so right now, just using our current allocation and the current year in the biennium, we're at 49.7 million. And so the goal again is to get the waiver from the federal government from the BEAD allocation to add that to our almost $50 million allocation.
Which would be how much then?
Again, the definition of initial, I'm hoping 100 million quicker than what the federal government is saying, but the goal is to get more money than that. We're eligible for 20% of whatever our number will be. We do not know the number.
Our goal here is to make sure that we don't have to hold up body projects that might not be immediately successful this round, so we can get those projects underway. And the way the federal rules are written right now is we're going to have to slow our process down, slow these projects down before we can deliver funding to shovel-ready projects that are well designed ready to go.
So the 49.7
is our current biennium.
Current. What's the
Our next biennium is 49.7 as well. We have not proposed this, but we've talked about, is it potential to, Kristen's gonna look at me because I've probably posed it once. Could we potentially get the 100 million from the biennium, but that's more of a policy question. And so right now we have 49.7 through June of this year, June of next year.
It's 49 per fiscal year, so
49
so it's almost 100 million.
100 million, yes,
For
in
the
the biennium.
biennium, yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
That answer your question?
Yes.
Great.
One more item that I wanted to bring up, and I've mentioned to staff is potentially at the next meeting, could we maybe look at some sort of update on Centurylink? So in our locality, Franklin County, that's probably the call I get more than anything is the status of Centurylink service. Centurylink's an ESL provider. A lot of the rural localities, that is the internet option right now. But they're going through a changeover in ownership, and they've got some pending, correct way to word it, got some SEC requirements and so forth, some things that'll be happening. I think some as soon as maybe next week, some changes start to happen. And so I just feel like it would be helpful for maybe some of our legislators and some of our rural communities to kind of know where things stand in that process and how things are hopefully getting better, how they can also just the customer service side of things where we've seen some progress. I know in Albemarle as well, we've kind of been, I think two is more vocal, kind of working with them, but I think it's not just an isolated issue for Franklin and Albemarle. I think a lot of rural Virginia, is experiencing that. So and I'm not intending this to be a bashing in any way. I think it's actually more of a positive twist on, hey, these are some things that are happening with Centurylink and Brightspeed. I think it's the new company that will be working. So I don't know if that's a staff update or if that's having someone from Centurylink maybe brief the council on, the changes that are coming forward. So I just throw that out for just consideration to see what you might think is the next appropriate step, or if it's appropriate at all.
Centurylink is one, Centurylink, which is now Lumen, which on Monday will become Brightspeed, is one of my members. So I think I can safely say that I can get somebody here that can give an update at the next meeting.
I'd like to propose potentially SEC being here too, so they can walk the Broadband Advisory Council through the reporting process. I think that would be important for the VAC to know where the FCC, what role they're playing and how that's going. I think it's important we understand because of the 911 services. I bring this up all the time. We can't ignore that there's going to be a transition portion of this process. It doesn't matter whether it's Brightspeed, Centurylink, Lumen, anyone who's providing 911 services across the Commonwealth. Fiber is not the answer for a while because there's a lot of people who aren't going to understand what it means to give up their copper line. They're dependent on a powered telephone to make a 911 call in situations when the power is out. Pretty soon that's not going to be available to them unless they take action on their own. So there's a critical point that we're going to get to. Fortunately, we have a little more time, but I think it's important for us to understand how the SEC is working with any ISP to make sure as they put new infrastructure in the ground, 911 services are not impacted. They're actually enhanced. Our goal should be an enhanced 911 service as all this new infrastructure goes throughout the Commonwealth. So I'd love to hear from the FCC and Brightspeed together if we could possibly get that.
Didn't we put legislation in when we did that? When we did that legislation to separate the landlines and stuff, and they went off on their own, that they weren't allowed to leave the territory until there was adequate service.
Right.
So are you saying they're not available?
No, who manages that? Who's overall, when it doesn't happen? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Someone's left without 911 for a week. What is the penalty?
Yeah, so I know that that's been brought up before, the whole 911 issue, and I believe that there's a whole commission on 911 that should be delving into that.
It's run through VETA. And,
Okay.
I'm actually the chair of
Are
the
you?
Virginia Aggregation Network,
Okay,
and we haven't had a meeting in it seems like a decade. So I'm trying to get to the bottom of it, but they're overseeing, we get constant reports for progress of Virginia services. So that would be where it would be turned.
okay, because I know that there's some places in Loudoun County that have had some challenges around 911 service. That's for sure. They're looking at it.
Under old model digital or transition to.
I guess the transition where they had the ability to.
First I heard of it. I'll make a note.
And then I will also bring up, you've heard talking, I'm gonna push the name of the state agency, the.
Virginia Department of Deaf and Hard of Hearing.
Yes, so also folks that are hard of hearing,
the landline services to utilize their telecommunication equipment. So we're currently working with them to get addresses of where their clients are located, to make sure that as the bottom projects are being built out, that the providers know that there's someone there who's currently on a landline that will still need a landline for them to communicate. And so we're currently working with them as well.
Great, that's good to know.
Thank you, Jana.
I feel like we have really
Yes.
covered a lot of territory today. This has been very productive. I'm gonna give council members another opportunity to speak up about any other new business or, and if not, I would ask for a motion to adjourn. You all get how to move.
Second.
All righty. Thank you so much for your time. Meeting is adjourned.